We'll just make sure everybody's camera's off, aren't they? Because we're going to be recording it. So welcome, Michael, and I'll hand over to you to introduce who you are and your background.
Thank you, Jill. That was great. I think you've already sort of given what I was going to say anyway, so that was very very helpful. So, right, can you see a slide? Just shout. Yeah. Okay. Cool. So hi everyone. So my name's Mike Groves, and obviously Jill's just given a really good summary there around the circular economy and what that actually means. And kind of related to that, clearly we still have this issue of waste. So I'm going to really sort of focus on that aspect of the circular economy and argue that it remains a material issue, even within the context where we're trying to design waste out of our, kind of production and operational systems.
So, Michael, I can't see your slides. They're not sharing. I can't.
Ah, right. Okay. Hang on a second. All right. Bear with me a second. All right. Right. How's that?
Yeah, that's better.
Yes.
Okay, great. All right. Well, I won't repeat what I've just said. So, but just a bit of background. So my background, academically, I'm a geographer and a PhD in Earth observation, remote sensing. So looking at kind of forestry using kind of aerial photography and other means. But I basically then went through, worked in environmental consultancy and ended up actually working in Southeast Asia. This was my typical view daily. This is my office on a daily basis. So basically auditing forest management across Southeast Asia, Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, etc. So I was really at the kind of the sharp end of certainly approaches to sort of trying to manage natural resources in a much more kind of sustainable way. But of course, based in Indonesia, and really, when I wasn't working, obviously there's lots of access to some wonderful kind of environments and some amazing beaches. But obviously, too often one would find sort of detritus, sort of washed up, sort of always flip-flops and plastic bottles, etc. So I guess that there was that sort of moment of thinking, well, how on earth did all of this material end up in this location? And clearly it's the tides, but there's clearly an issue here because this material is leaking out of our the kind of the systems, the sort of use and the product and the if you like the goods and the products and the packaging, which could be recovered and recycled, but is leaking out of that system. So really just, I won't labor this, but obviously, the whole idea of the circular economy or circular economies clearly is all about trying to stop that material effectively leaking out of that system. So maximizing its kind of utility, whether that be via recycling, but also refurbishment, remanufacturing, but also then ultimately, kind of new models of business models for, servitization, for sharing, for rental, etc., etc. But the thing is, of course, this is the ambition, of course, that we have, but clearly in terms of where we are at the moment, we're still a kind of long way off that, to that sort of creating and that scaled, functional, sort of globally significant circular economy or set of circular economies. So the latest circularity gap report has us at 7.2% circularity sort of globally in terms of how we are kind of cycling materials back into production systems. And related to that, of course, what we've got is we've got this kind of material, this waste material, these byproducts, whether it be generated in an industrial capacity or in a sort of municipal capacity. That volume of that material is still set to increase. If you look at some of the World Bank numbers, you've got kind of significant increases, pretty well everywhere in terms of that material that's going to be pushed into that, into that sort of waste stroke recycling kind of system. So from our point of view, we see that whilst we have to try and design it out in the first place, obviously we're trying to kind of design new products, new forms of packaging, new materials, new business models, we still have to kind of address this problem of all of this kind of stuff that is being kind of pushed into this kind of waste and recycling system. And that's really that's really where we've come at it. Then that clearly, as Jill has said, that clearly has a kind of material kind of impact and a social impact, an environmental impact, but it clearly also has a sort of carbon impact when you think of the, sort of global carbon emissions related to the production, the consumption, and the use of goods and sort of products and packaging. It is quite significant. So it's not just a sort of purely material issue in that way. Clearly, it has an impact in relation to carbon emissions. But at the moment, of course, a lot of that material, or the bulk of that material, is still either being dumped in holes in the ground, or is being is leaking into the environment. But of course, we all recognise that there is some inherent value in that material, as we saw there with the NHS example of taking cardboard out of the recycling system and putting it into more of a sort of closed loop. Clearly there are sort of huge significant opportunities to do that, but it involves investment, it involves time, it involves new processes, and it involves just some care and attention to sort of start thinking about other ways that we can kind of deal with all of this type of material. So we think one of the, if you like, one of the sort of barriers to that, and clearly one of the opportunities, is the fact that it is quite a kind of complex kind of system, is it not? So, you've got multiple material types being generated across multiple locations by different organizations, whether they be in the public sector, whether they be in the private sector, whether it be obviously kind of households and so on and so forth. And then that material is then all being kind of collected and moved by third parties. And then, of course, it's moved through a whole series of sites and transformations before something happens to it. And the data that is kind of collected and the visibility that those entities, those organizations within that value chain have is quite limited in most cases. So we think actually by making that system more visible and building trust in that data, we can actually start to sort of, look at, enable better ways of kind of handling and processing and doing stuff to that material. So we can ultimately reduce the amount of material that is ultimately being lost from that system, and help to kind of enable a greater recovery and reuse of that material. So that's really what I do on a daily basis. So, when we you think about that conceptually, of course, what you're dealing with is physical material that's being put into containers of some type and then collected and then moved. And of course, the movement of that material in itself creates an impact. So that's really what we're dealing with. We're dealing with we're sort of trying to sort of see that waste system as a system in that way, but recognizing that you're dealing with physical material that needs to be moved somehow in order for something to happen to it. Whether that movement is, sort of nationally or internationally, or whether that is locally, it's that level of complexity exists. So my company Topolytics, we're a data analytics kind of business, and essentially what we're aiming to do, or trying to do, is make the world's waste visible, verifiable, and valuable for the reasons that I guess I've just sort of tried to describe there. So our customers would be those organizations, whether they be the private or the public sector, that are generating lots of that kind of material as a byproduct of doing business or going about their business. And so essentially what we're trying to do is help them to sort of identify these opportunities for efficiencies, also validate compliance, measure the impact of what's happening to that material and reducing that impact. And then for some, where reporting is a kind of crucial part of what they have to do, then it's helping in that regard as well. So essentially, our whole approach to this is to say that there isn't a single beautiful digital footprint for all of that kind of waste and sort of byproduct material that is generated through through a sort of operation. And so what we have to do is be able to deal with data from in many different formats from many different sources. And in the main, what we do with our customers is we're pulling data in from the companies and organizations that are responsible for collecting and then moving and doing something to all of that different waste material. So these would be waste and recycling contractors and others. And so we pull all that data into our platform, which is called Waste Map, does what it says on the tin. And then our customers can get a single version of the truth. They get a single view of what's happening across all of different sites with different materials, different sort of waste contractors and recycling contractors. And it starts to sort of give them that sort of trust and that visibility so that they can start to then make decisions about maybe taking some of that material out of that system, maybe actually reducing the impact of moving significant quantities of material, et cetera, et cetera. So it's really sort of giving them kind of insights where previously perhaps they didn't have that visibility. So we see a lot of data that's kind of quite kind of messy and mixed, and it might be in spreadsheets, it might be on bits of paper, it might be pulled in directly from third-party systems. But that's okay, because we accept that that data is going to be quite varied in its quality and kind of varied in the kind of systems that we work with. But we will also work with data that is being generated by smart labels, by barcodes, by kind of sensor-based systems, even down to sort of things like RFID labels. So we have worked with data, for example, that's being generated by bin sensors, the Internet of Bins, or in the case on the right, where we're working on a system that is for a refillable packaging system. So that's tracking refillable packaging through from the point at which it's distributed to then returned and then pushed through a sorting and a cleaning process and then refilled and then pushed back into a kind of retail system. So that's driven by kind of RFID labels embedded in the packaging, but that's not universal. So within the waste and recycling sector, most of the data we see wouldn't be coming from these kind of systems, but these kind of systems are starting to be used more widely. But essentially what we're doing is we're moving our customers from a position where they have a limited view of all of that materials system to one where they have a much richer view. It maybe isn't perfect, but it's infinitely better than the view that they currently have, and it allows them to then think about making different decisions about that material and what happens to it. So we're working. These are just some sort of the kind of private sector kind of customers that we're working with across a range of different kind of sectors. I hasten to add. I mean, we take the view that whether you're a service-based business, whether you're a manufacturer, whether you're a mining company, whether you're a health board, clearly you're generating waste of many different types, from hazardous, clinical, to sort of really sort of special type waste materials, right the way across to general waste and recyclables. That kind of range varies depending on the organization, what it does. So we're not restricted by any one particular type of material, because we have a data model that really sort of distills it down into some key sort of components, i.e. what is it, how much of it is there, where is it collected from, who's moved it, and where they moved it to. So this enables us to start sort of building this picture across multiple materials and multiple sites and organizations. But we have done some work in the manufacturing space kind of recently, and just finished a project with funded by Innovate UK, where we were specifically looking at manufacturing and what manufacturers think about waste, what they know about waste, and what they're currently sort of doing around this kind of thing. And we recognize that in some ways there was a disconnect between the level of importance attached to waste and knowing how much of it is there and what it is and where it goes, but the disconnect with what they actually do know about waste that's generated through a production process, for example. So that was quite an interesting project. But in terms of sort of the benefits of taking this approach and looking at taking another view on kind of waste materials, I think some of it's already, Jill's already touched on some of those kind of benefits, whether it be related to, purely cost savings around, sort of material costs, raw material costs, and the cost of waste management and recycling. Obviously, you've got materials themselves in terms of stopping that material perhaps leaking out of the system, maybe not being recycled or recovered as well as it could. And then clearly attached to that, kind of carbon savings around reusing, remanufacturing, refurbishment, recycling of those materials. But within larger organizations, we're also seeing, symbiosis opportunities. So where one part of a business or organization, could make use of something that another part of the business is essentially, is a byproduct from another part of the business. But maybe that wasn't visible initially, but by taking that sort of view of that waste as a system, then it starts to maybe sort of open up some of these kind of opportunities. So these are the kind of things that we're starting to see through Waste Map. So really, in terms of those kind of organizations that we work with and others, I think there is that. Obviously waste there is a legal sort of compliance around what about waste and what you're doing with that material. So clearly there's a whole piece about compliance and validating what's happening to that material. The opportunities to identify these kind of cost and resource efficiencies, in this example, taking material out of a kind of recycling kind of contract and actually transacting directly with the manufacturer. And the analogy I think was a good one with the health board, and taking cardboard out of recycling system and actually transacting directly with those that can use the shredded material themselves. So I think that these kind of opportunities are definitely there if you're willing to sort of take another look at the at the, if you like, at the challenge. But clearly there's also the idea of impact reduction. So we see a lot of material that's being moved significant distances, and that's part of our whole thing is looking at waste geospatially, because the logistical aspect of it is really crucial. You need to be able to move it in an economically viable way in order for something useful to happen to it. So understanding that, if you like, that the spatial dynamic of waste, whether it be within a factory or whether it be out in the world in that supply chain, I think is really important, because there are impacts attached to the movement of that material as well. And then we talked about symbiosis and these ideas of being, by seeing it across different sites and different materials, and there are these opportunities for sort of really understanding and planning in a different way for what might happen to material, where material could be moved, where it could be collected, where it could be shared with others, etc., etc. And then reporting. I mean, obviously most large organizations have reporting requirements of some description, but obviously particularly within the private sector, within the sort of larger kind of listed organizations, the growing amount of scrutiny around ESG and sustainability reporting. I mean, that's certainly really going to grow, particularly in Europe over the next kind of few years. So the quality of the data that is then going into that kind of reporting is going to have to increase, but also the companies themselves, organizations, are going to have to understand how good or not that data is. So where waste is a material issue, then then we definitely see these kind of opportunities. So I'll just finish on that, and obviously happy to take any questions. So thank you very much, and yeah, by all means, fire any questions, Emily.
Okay. Thank you, Michael. Anybody got any questions? Welcome to turn your mics or your cameras back on.